Welcome to another show of Liberation Hour Radio. We're so excited to have the amazing Mexie with us today. Welcome, Mexie.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So it's a real pleasure for us. Mexie has a popular YouTube channel, Mexie, where she provides grounded critiques of capitalism and explores issues related to social, environmental, economic justice, and animal liberation. Mexie holds a Ph.D. in human geography, political ecology, which she received on a SSHRC scholarship. Her work explores the intersections between political economy and environmental governance, with research sites in Canada and Thailand. She's been a leftist as long as she can remember, vegetarian for 10 years, and finally vegan for 5 years. Welcome again, Mexie.
Yes, thank you so much.
So why don't we start? Can you tell us a little bit about your activist story, a little bit about your background? Where in Southern Ontario did you originate from?
Sure. So I originated from Newmarket, Ontario. My activist story. So, I mean, I feel like I kind of got to activism a little bit late in the game compared to how young it seems that people are really getting turned on to activism and these kinds of really, important politics today. But so, I mean, I felt like I was anti-capitalist even when I was in high school. Even when I was a child, I really thought, why are we organizing the world the way that we're organizing it right now? All we need to do is make food and share it and make sure that everyone has shelter. So, why are we doing all of this? Why are we destroying the earth, kind of thing? But anyway, so yeah, when I was a teenager, I was pretty anti-capitalist. I was really anti-war. But living in Newmarket, I don't know, not a lot of people were very political. There wasn't a lot going on. And I didn't really have a lot of the language to talk about a lot of the stuff that really interested me. So I learned a lot more, obviously, in my undergrad and my master's. And that's when I really, I guess, developed the language to talk about things like anti-capitalism, animal liberation, speciesism, all of that kind of stuff. And then I guess I got into activism through, I started my YouTube channel first. And then through that, I ended up meeting other activists in Toronto and then getting kind of hooked into networks of people doing things on the ground, and then got more involved in actions. And so now I kind of do both in terms of the education and outreach piece, and then getting involved with local activism as well. So yeah, that was kind of my trajectory.
Yeah, that's quite the story. So that's cool. And you said you've been finally vegan for 5 years. What was the tipping point for you?
So I'm embarrassed to say that it was actually health, because when I first went vegetarian, so when in my undergrad, I was taking environmental anthropology and environmental studies. And so I was learning about just the complete unsustainability of meat production and consumption. And so that's why I went vegetarian first. It was because I came into it through that environmental angle. And I didn't know what was going on really in the egg industry or the dairy industry until much later. And I kind of thought that I was already doing my part because I was like, oh, well, I'm already not eating animals, so I'm already not contributing to animal cruelty. And I really had no idea about those industries. And then, long story short, I've actually made a video about it, but I ran into some serious health issues. And at that moment, I was kind of looking for answers, and I found a lot about how veganism could help with my specific, problem. So I decided to go vegan, and through that, I started to get introduced to a lot of vegan activists, and I started to see a lot more, I started watching documentaries and things like that and seeing what actually happened in the egg industry, the dairy industry, learning about all of that. And so I quickly became, an ethical vegan, but it certainly didn't start that way. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that this information is just so, it's so hidden from the general public. Like even somebody who knows at least enough to stop eating meat for environmental reasons still, I feel like maybe today, with social media and YouTube and all of that, maybe it's easier for people to find this information. But I certainly, with all the ag laws and everything, it's just this kind of stuff is not really readily available to the public, right? So
yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, Well, you got there. You
I
got there
got
before
there.
I did. So I'm only 3.5 years plant-based and animal activist. So you're old school as far as my history would indicate.
Yeah.
But one of the things I love about your shows is that you really dig into some ways to educate for people to educate themselves, particular authors in particular. And you've put me onto a bunch of different sources through some of your different shows, which I really appreciate. I can honestly say I don't think I was reading anything by Black or Indigenous authors before I became an activist, and some of your tips have been amazing. One in particular, Adrienne Maree Brown. We can just talk about, we could probably talk all day about Adrienne Maree Brown, but we haven't got all day. So her books, Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism, you've read them both, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's really, really wonderful. Yeah. Emergent Strategy was really inspirational for me and Maureen, who co-host the Vegan Vanguard together. Because I don't know, yeah, I guess not that we were feeling kind of stuck or whatever, but we were, and I was for most of my career, very, very focused on the critique, right? The critique of capitalism, the critique of speciesism, the critique of all these oppressive systems, and, you know, a lot of analysis of how they all fit together. But not really focused on the what's next, other than just very broad, you know, we know what we don't want and we know broadly what we want. But yeah, I guess sometimes it feels kind of disempowering to be in that place of critique all the time, because it can make it feel like these systems are just so, you know, they're just juggernauts, like they're just unstoppable, and these different oppressions are connected in such intricate ways that how are we going to fight them, right? And it was really, really inspiring for us to I guess hear this different kind of perspective, and to think more about the importance of radical imagination and radical creativity, of actually spending time trying to imagine, not in like a broad abstract way, but just to actually imagine, you know, what kind of future do we want to build, and where, you know, where do we go from here to get there? And the importance of, you know, focusing more on, I guess, a lot of the kind of interpersonal parts of building movements, as opposed to just here's the facts. Because I think we have the idea on the left maybe that if we just give people the facts, then they'll do the right thing with it, right? If we just get the information out. But I don't think that's true. I think actually we also have to foster, you know, empathy and compassion in people. And we actually have to build those networks of, yeah, relationships and trust, so that we actually are building something, you know, concrete that we can go forward with, instead of just kind of a mass of people that aren't really fully connected, maybe don't really trust each other, and aren't really sure what we're marching towards, because they also haven't really imagined for themselves what they would want to see, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, but Mexie, I'm a cis male white businessman. Why don't people listen to me anymore? I used to just have to open my mouth, and I assumed everybody was listening to me. Maybe they never were, but now I find the world is shifting, and I really do think
No.
authors like Adrienne Maree Brown have been incredible at teaching me to close my cis male white mouth a little more often, and listen to great ideas. It's been a revelation. I mean, she talks about change is constant, so be like water, she says. Trust people and they become trustworthy, and to move at the speed of trust. You know, I was always I probably still am, to be honest. Go, let's do something. But I agree with you. I think it's much more important to spend time strategizing and building connections. Without a team, it's, you know, impossible to do anything effective.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, online leftist activism has really showed me the importance of actually building community, because when you're not in real community with people, you don't have real relationships with people, you don't have trust among people. If something happens, if there's some kind of, I don't know, abuse or some issue going on, and, you know, you're trying to rectify it, it's really, really difficult, right? It's really difficult to hold people accountable for things in a space where they don't really know each other, they don't really trust each other. And I feel like it kind of fosters an environment where people end up being more, or displaying more fragility, because then if somebody says like, oh, hey, you know, I don't know, if you phrase things this way, or when you said this, like, this was a little bit problematic for this reason or whatever, people will get really defensive and whatnot. And it's because we don't have that community of like care and trust built up. And yeah, I really do think that to create lasting change, we need to create change, I don't know, like within ourselves as well as within the broader world. And I think that, yeah, Adrienne Maree Brown has a lot to offer to that project.
Completely agree. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that I've only recently learned, and I'm probably going to be working on it forever. But she's an amazing author, and I wish everybody would read Emergent Strategy for sure. Octavia Butler, she's another one that I love. And I was always a big science fiction fan, and I never found her while she was alive, sadly. But I never had thought of science fiction in the way that she seems to have explained it as a visualization of another possible future. Any comments on any particular works of hers or your experience with it?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. So I got into Octavia Butler largely because of Adrienne Maree Brown, and how she always talks about how much we can learn from Octavia and her books and things like that. And so, yeah, I really, really love her writing. I think the most famous books of hers are Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. And that's where she talks about, God is change, right? So it's kind of a continuation of, well, I guess Octavia wrote it before Adrienne, but kind of this continuation of this theme around the fact that everything is change. And for me, it's also kind of a Buddhist idea, this idea of impermanence, and the importance of, I guess, shaping change in the way that you want to shape change. And understanding that, no matter what you do, there will be change, and to not fear that. Because I think for a lot of people, even if you are radical anti-capitalist, anti-speciesist, the whole bit, I think there are a lot of ways that people hold on to certain systems that we have right now because they either give them power, or they're scared of, okay, but this is all I know, or this is all we know. What happens if we tear this down? And so I think people end up being invested in kind of the systems that they purportedly want to change, right? And I think that this idea, like, God is change, we need to shape God, we need to shape change, and we need to accept that change is constant, like change is the default, I guess, mode of the universe, then we don't have to fear it, right? We don't have to fear it. We just have to try to shape it as best we can.
Octavia Butler said, humanity is flawed by hierarchical thinking that leads to intolerance, violence, and if not stopped, to ultimate destruction of our species. Do you see us heading towards ultimate destruction of our species, Mexie?
Oh, of course.
Of course. No. Will it be so?
I mean, that's definitely where we're headed, right? I mean, climate change, everything, the contradictions of capitalism. I mean, we're seeing all the rebellions that are, sweeping the globe right now, right? Around Black Lives Matter, but not only just Black Lives Matter, just, systemic injustice that's been going on for far too long. And yeah, that all stems from hierarchical thinking, patriarchy, white supremacy, capital, and yeah, just our rush towards profit, profit at all costs. So yeah, I mean, in terms of what's going on with climate change, certainly we're definitely rushing towards that. But I'm actually kind of optimistic, and especially with what's going on with the rebellions right now and how fast the discussion has changed, how fast the discourse has changed. Because Black Lives Matter, that this has been around since the Obama years, but I feel like this is a really big moment, right? Where it's been really, really educational for a lot of people. And, we went from, protesting to defunding the police, abolishing the police, right? That's actually being talked about now seriously, whereas you could never mention anything like that before. And even in Toronto, there's a movement right now to defund the police by at least 10%, which is amazing. So I'm kind of optimistic that even though this year has been horrible, from the Australian bushfires to COVID to all this police brutality, I think it's really opening a lot of people's eyes, and yeah, I don't know how much longer I guess the ruling class can keep this up. It's kind of been mask off, I think.
So in summary, yes, ultimate destruction, but some optimism in
Some
there as well.
optimism.
And a third author that I'd love to talk to you about is Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I'm sure that you put me onto her. That book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, is just a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It was so wonderful. Her writing style is so beautiful. It's so poetic. And she's really able to explain things in ways that, you know, it seems so obvious, and she just has a really great way of explaining really complex concepts, but just in a really simple and beautiful way. And yeah, that book was really, really, impactful for me. I recommend it to everyone, honestly.
I've bought a couple extra copies and handed them out already. It's just so beautiful.
I know.
One of the differences for me coming from New Zealand originally was that about 20%, 25% of the population is Indigenous, and it's integrated. And there's still definitely, you know, racism and tensions and things, but I was exposed to Indigenous people and their stories a lot. But here in Canada, it's a much lower percentage, and the systems that have been put in place make it much harder to absorb some of those stories. And she just puts some of those stories into such a beautiful content, and just blew my mind. I love her stuff.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And I just really, I mean, I talk all the time about the importance of worldview, and how it's not just capital. I mean, all of our minds have been so colonized by capital, by white supremacy, by patriarchy and things like that. And this worldview that sees us as separate from nature, right? That sees us as something that stands apart from the rest of the non-human world. We don't see ourselves as being part of our ecosystems. We don't see ourselves as having any positive role to play in our ecosystems, right? So that's why a lot of times you'll have the kind of Malthusian overpopulation type discourses, because everyone will just assume that humanity is just a destructive force, and there's no place for humanity in nature, right? And it's such a destructive worldview, and it really just serves capital, right, and capital accumulation. And I just feel like she is able to articulate the complete opposite worldview, right? And I feel like we really, really need to, think a lot more about that, and kind of decolonize our minds from the systems that we're, I guess, inculcated with, if we're going to make any real systemic change, right? So yeah, I just love it.
Couple of the stories, I mean, it starts with the story of Sky Woman literally falling to earth as the first human, and how the animals and the plants helped her and saved her on Turtle Island. And the other one that really grabs me is the story of the Wendigo. Which is that this evil character that is a reminder to recoil from the greedy parts of ourselves or overconsumption. That just, I mean, I could have had nightmares about the Wendigo. And I imagine if I was a small child, I would be terrified at that idea. But just beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I taught that book actually to my students this year. And they really, really took a lot from the Wendigo story and how that related to, capitalist greed. And so, yeah, that was really wonderful. And that's what I mean about the importance of worldview, right? If you're brought up to think that, we're separate from nature, and that amassing wealth is a sign of success, right? She talks about how in many indigenous cultures, a sign of success is, or a sign that you have a lot of wealth, is that you've given a lot away, right? So that's actually a sign of status. If you're able to give, the more you're able to give, I guess that reflects, a high degree of success, right? Whereas in our kind of society, a high degree of success means you've amassed a lot of things for yourself, and you're sitting on them, and you're certainly not sharing them with anyone else, and you're trying to, put your money in a bunch of tax havens to make sure that you're not paying any taxes or anything like that, right? So it's just a completely different way of, understanding our relationships between ourselves and non-human animals as well. So yeah,
totally. And I'm probably not if I can use this, but I recall there's a brief description of Christianity in there, and the idea of the difference in a religion that basically kicks you out for
Yeah.
eating fruit and go off and take care of yourself. You're now outcast, separate from
Yep.
nature, as opposed to the, I guess there's
Yeah.
a whole range of indigenous traditions, but the traditions that she described as being, inclusive and, as you say, sharing and gift based. It's just wonderful stuff.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So just briefly, Vegan Vanguard podcast, yourself and Maureen, the privileged vegan. What's the
Yeah.
history behind that? It's such a wonderful show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So history behind that. We actually met each other via our respective YouTube channels because we were both making content that was anti-capitalist and also, in line with animal liberation. And yeah, we found each other's channels. We both loved what we were seeing. We started talking via comments, and then we started talking, offline. We added each other on WhatsApp, and we were sending each other these really, really long voice notes every day, and just talking through all these, really big ideas. And we just thought, hey, why don't we put this out? Why don't we put this out as a podcast? And yeah, it's been really, really wonderful. We were really inspired by Vegan Warrior Princess's Attack that was doing something similar at the time. Because other than that, there was a lot of amazing, Black and other people of color in the vegan movement who were doing a lot of great work, like Christopher Sebastian, Dr. Breeze Harper, et cetera, et cetera, AFCO, Silco, et cetera. But in terms of media and podcasts and things like that, a lot of what you would have to consume if you were a vegan was a lot of, I don't know, it was maybe a capitalist approach to veganism, right? There's a lot of just focus on like what to eat, what to buy and things like that, but not really linking anti-speciesism with other liberation movements like anti-capitalist, feminists, LGBTQ, et cetera, liberation movements. And so, yeah, we really, really wanted to, I guess, advance that discourse. And I feel like it's going kind of well, right? I feel like now there's a lot more focus on kind of the intersections between all of these things. And I'm really heartened to see a lot of more kind of intersectional vegan and anti-speciesist activists kind of popping up everywhere. And yeah, so yeah, it's been a great project, I feel.
And is it going to continue? Did you see a
for sure.
long future for that? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Now I'm happy. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back after the break with more of the amazing Mexie. Thanks for being with us.
Great. So the first book is The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, and yes, I have beaten the hell out of this book. This is a great book because if you're new to leftism, it's just an enjoyable and easy book to read and to comprehend. It actually talks about geopolitics and how the neoliberal Washington consensus like policies are being, very forcefully very forcibly forced on peoples around the world. And then she documents the devastating effects that these actually have for people living in those countries. Okay, next up is Caliban and the Witch. Everybody read this. Everyone read it now. Like, everyone read this book. This is such an incredible read. This is a wonderful Marxist feminist book, and it really looks at the transition period between feudalism and capitalism, and it looks at the systematic ways in which women and minorities, and Aboriginal peoples around the world, and slaves were intentionally and necessarily just destroyed and devalued and dehumanized in order to really divide the working class in the interests of capital. And it's just incredibly shocking. I mean, the kinds of things that went on. Obviously, I mean, she's detailing what went on during the witch hunts and how that relates to primitive accumulation and land privatization. And yeah, it's so eye-opening. I would also recommend Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, and Coulthart, Red Skin, White Masks. I really liked The Wretched of the Earth. He combines Marxism with like psychoanalysis of colonial subjects and the colonial condition, and he really makes the case that, you know, any anti-colonial struggle must also be an anti-capitalist one. Yeah, I love Fanon, very good. And then Coulthard, amazing book. So he kind of applies that whole line of thinking to First Nations people in Canada, and once again makes the case for you know, a radical anti-colonial and anti-capitalist struggle. And it's just brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant. 50% of humanity adopts a vegan lifestyle so far. Turns out it's just easier to grow plants than animals. Who knew? These baby penguins have reclaimed what used to be known as an oil rig, and it is adorable. 10 beautiful pictures of the deep forest in the ruins of suburbia. Number 6 will make you cry. This shocking relic of a person describes the curious reasons why they still choose to eat earthlings.
That's so cute.
That's awesome.
One of my favorites was, I didn't put it in here, I think on purpose. Donald Trump kept alive just long enough to see the fall of capitalism.
Oh,
shakes
man.
his tiny hands in the air and says, "I'm a monster," or something like that. It's a beauty, but I thought, well, it upset the Americans.
Oh, that's so funny.
It is gorgeous. But yeah.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Welcome back after the break to Liberation Now Radio with the amazing Mexie on Facebook, YouTube, Rogers Channel 946 and 102.7 FM. Thanks for coming back, Mexie.
Yes.
I wanted to, if you're willing, to dig into one of my favorite pieces that you did, which was on the tragedy of the commons. I think for those that don't know the original story, it might be worth explaining that the tragedy of the commons was, as I understand it, the tragedy of the commons was the idea that you couldn't possibly have a common shared resource between different owners of resources, because they would tend to prioritize their own preferences and ultimately degrade the resource. That's why it was used as a justification, I think, for why private ownership was more important and would be a better steward of the land. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was used to argue that his idea was that we either need private property and private ownership, because the idea was that if property is owned privately, then you know, someone's not going to degrade their own property. But you know, that doesn't really work when we're talking about like mega corporations and things like that, like big agribusiness and whatever. Like, they're obviously degrading the soil and the environment quite a lot, but they're doing that because that actually maximizes their profit, right? So yeah, within that kind of a system, that's not going to be helpful. But his other solution was really strict top-down government control. But he, I guess, favored the private property, private ownership model. And so this has been used for a long time to justify that. And it doesn't actually make sense. And as Eleanor Ostrom showed, around the world where there are resources held in common, like, that's actually the norm. People working together and people holding things in common is actually more of the norm, and the resources are not being degraded. They're being degraded in our system of private ownership, where everyone's trying to maximize their own benefit, right?
Everything's getting degraded. That's for sure. And I think it should be called the tragedy of the commons or something.
Exactly. Yes.
So short-sighted, but yeah. Part of the video, I think, included the example was of some sheep being kept in a field, which was I don't think that was your source. I think it was somebody else's video. But I was trying to think of an analogy that we could use to briefly talk about it. The best one I could come up with was having a common basement where you keep kidnapped billionaires. There's an optimal number of billionaires that could fit in there, but nobody owns the basement, so each person could choose to put more billionaires in there, which would benefit them, but the billionaires might get a little bit sicker. And overall, it wasn't the most productive way to do things. I don't know if you can explain that any better than I can, because I'm making a meal of it.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. No, I mean, the sheep, I guess, analogy was Garrett Hardin, that's basically how he came up with this whole idea of the tragedy of the commons, was by, I guess, doing a thought analysis of a hypothetical that he came up with. Well, I think it was based on, I guess, things he was seeing at the time. Simon Springer. Do you know Simon Springer? He's an amazing, so he's an anarchist geographer. So he's an academic, but he's, just an anarchist, anti-speciesist activist. He writes a lot about animal liberation and tying that to, anti-capitalism and feminism and things like that. And he pointed out that this analogy that Garrett Hardin came up with the sheep is problematic, because he fails to realize that in that analogy, the sheep are considered property and they are privately owned, right? So it's not a true commons. If it was a commons, I mean, again, I don't like the analogy of sheep either, because then it would be like the community has this group of sheep that they're all managing in common or whatever. Maybe they're just allowing the sheep to live their own lives and, providing them with some care or something like that. But right, so in that analogy of the tragedy of the commons, the sheep are considered property, and they are privately owned. So what you're talking about isn't a commons. It's not commons management. Like if there was commons management of a forest or any other kind of thing, right? Or I don't know, some kind of agriculture or something. If you had something like that, then nothing within that commons would be privately owned. That's what it means to have a commons, right? But if you have things that are privately owned and you have people who are trying to maximize the benefit of those quote unquote commodities, and again, this is a problem with treating sheep as commodities, but if you have that situation and you're in kind of an open area, right, it's the problem with open access, but it's only a problem because we're within a system of private ownership where people try to maximize their own benefit. And therefore you come into competition with other people who are also trying to maximize their own benefit. And that obviously would end up degrading the resource, which in this case he imagined to be the grass, right, the meadow. But yeah, I mean, that's only a problem within this system, right? If it was a totally different system and we're thinking about commons management in an actual commons, then, things look much differently. And Eleanor Ostrom really kind of proved that in her work all around the world as well. So.
Very cool, very cool. Mm-hmm. Do you think, we're looking at a big R or a small R revolution? Can you see a peaceful transition, or should I just stay here in my car and wait for the end?
I mean, I definitely don't think it's going to be fully peaceful. I mean, we've even seen with, the Black Lives Matter protests and rebellions and things like that. Not that I think violence against property is violence, but, we've seen that, the police in every instance will come and will escalate that violence, right? They'll come out in their riot gear. And if you're protesting, then you're going to run up against, state violence. So I don't think it will be, perfectly peaceful. But I mean, I do definitely see it on the horizon. And I think especially as more and more people wake up, as the economic conditions that, structure people's lives deteriorate and people have a harder and harder time just making ends meet in the society, combined with things like increasing crises due to, storms and hurricanes and things that are associated with climate change, increasing scarcity of, resource. Well, I don't think we'll have scarcity. Scarcity is imposed under capital, but, just increasing crises, increasing pandemics even, related to our systems. I feel like things are definitely going to change. Maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe I will expire right before this happens, but I feel like it's not that far off. I don't think this kind of a system can continue that much longer, right?
Well, that's good news. It's good news that it's going to expire. I've always wondered if we can really defeat speciesism without tackling capitalism. It seems there they're so intertwined, but it doesn't mean we can't keep trying.
Yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
what next? What next? Can we get a matriarchy? Or what do you see after that?
Oh boy, I hope so. I really, really hope so. We talk a lot. So yeah, Maureen and I made a podcast about this. I can't remember the name of the podcast. I'll link it to you after. But we talked a lot about this idea that, patriarchy is the original othering. And it's present in a lot of different societies and cultures, not all, certainly not all. But, as the original othering, it's really, really important because, othering is kind of at the heart of a lot of these oppressive systems. And we see capitalism as kind of the natural outgrowth of, thousands of years of patriarchal modes of domination and governance and things like that. The construction of masculinity around war, things like that. And just the prioritizing of competition and, having no empathy, being rational logic man, and just taking more than you need, and putting other people down to get it, I guess. So we really do feel that it's massively important to dismantle patriarchy if we're going to move to a system, a post-capitalist system, because we kind of feel like if we allow othering to thrive, or if we allow patriarchy and toxic masculinity to thrive, it will lead us to a system like capital, right? But I think when a lot of people hear the term matriarchy, they think that it is just the reverse, right? And I feel like that's because we've been so inculcated within patriarchy to think that domination or oppression or having certain people elevated above others is just natural. That's just the way things are. So a lot of people who are against, anti-feminists and things like that, they think that what feminists want is just a reversal of the roles where women are on top and women are oppressing and dominating men and women are making all the money and things like that, which is obviously not the case. I feel like it's kind of telling. It's kind of like projecting because it's like, oh, they realize that if that were to happen to them, like if they were in the position that women are in this society, that would be really bad. And they don't want that, but they won't admit that this is bad because this is happening in general and we must move beyond that, right? But no, the whole idea is to move beyond that. And I think that I'm also pretty heartened with what I'm seeing with the younger generation. They seem to be a lot more open and accepting of people of all genders. They seem to be a lot more, interested in questioning the idea of gender and questioning the idea and questioning like toxic masculinity and its role in our society. And what it perpetuates and what it allows for. And I think I've seen a lot of change even in my lifetime around kind of a lot of these issues. So yeah, I really do hope that we do move towards a system that is more quote unquote matriarchal, more based around, circular living as opposed to, linear kind of modes of living and quote unquote progress and domination and exploitation. So yeah, I just, speaking of science fiction, I just read the Red Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but in there oh great, yeah. So in there he kind of talks a lot about these kinds of ideas and moving towards more of a kind of a matriarchal society where there isn't this kind of domination and oppression of women for profit and just material gain. So
well, that sounds good to me. But so in summary, we're going to put you in charge, but you be nice to us when we put you in charge, because that's what men do, I guess. But yeah, everything must go, everything must change. For those of you wondering why I'm in my car today, The Liberation Hour Radio has now got a mobile command unit. So we're out on the road with the studio being closed. And also Mexie actually promised that this was Revolution Day. So
Yes.
I didn't know this was just an interview. I was actually ready to head to the revolution, but here we are. Yeah, the studio's closed. I can't seem to get fired from my ridiculous job, no matter what I do. So I'm doing the other thing, which is hiding in my car for a couple of hours and doing this interview. And I guess it's good this isn't live, or my boss might be watching. But oh well, there we go.
Awesome.
Just something we struggle with is getting outside the bubble, reaching an audience outside of our activist circle. And I've seen you do some pretty creative things with some guests that weren't perhaps some of the initial guests that you would have had. I think I've even seen you do some game reviews in your show. So any comments on that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was really, really fun. Yeah, we're thinking of ways to branch out and reach different audiences that maybe wouldn't be interested in just something that's purely political or purely kind of dry or academic. So yeah, we had the game review, we have some movie reviews. I'm actually thinking of doing, so I listen to affirmations a lot. So I actually have the idea of making a bunch of really positive leftist affirmations and putting that out for people. So yeah, just trying to think of ways to, I guess, reach more people. And some of my comrades, Catherine, who is another anti-capitalist vegan, and the Nicole and Callie from Bitchy Shit Show, which is formerly Vegan Warrior Princesses Attack. We've been talking also how to reach, I guess, more women, because with YouTube and just in the online space, it tends to be a bit more dominated by men, or like, I think that young men make up the majority of viewers for YouTube. So we're thinking of ways to, I guess, make all of this stuff a little bit more personal and maybe interesting for different audiences. So we're thinking about talking about, opening up about like our body image issues and eating disorders, and kind of linking that to patriarchy and capitalism and things like that. So yeah, we're thinking about ways to, I guess, kind of broaden the appeal of some of this stuff, because it's all, everything's so interrelated. And I think people are ready to have their eyes open right now, especially after everything that's gone on this year. So yeah,
there's so much that we learn. What's that old song? I think when I think about all the crap I learned in high school, that told me would be useful. It's amazing the things that I never knew that I never knew them until become an activist and start getting exposed to these things. And I just wish we could reach the youth and stuff like that. Okay, I think we're going to take another short break. In the break, we're going to have some future headlines, which I think is an idea that Adrienne Marie Brown brought up, and you grabbed onto in your show.
In some of her short stories, or in the book that she put together, full of short science fiction stories, there were ones in there about writing a letter, I guess, to your past self from your future self about how things had changed, right? And how amazing things were in the future, and maybe thinking through like what were the steps that people took to get there, things like that, right? So we really felt like we wanted to exercise our radical creativity and try to think through some of this stuff. And so yeah, a lot of the things that people have sent us have been just awesome.
It's great. It's one of my favorite bits.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that, again, you talk about affirmations, these future positive headlines of the future just kind of blow your mind and make me feel so good about what's going on. So so we'll come back after the break, and then we'll wrap things up with the amazing Mexie.
Awesome. Record number of people walking around naked this summer without fear of harassment. I like that one. That's a really good one. Indigenous languages and history now mandatory in public school. Oh, I like this one too. Violence against non-men at lowest point in recorded history. AI robots decide they don't want to destroy humans, usher in luxury gay space communism instead. That's awesome. Entirely self-sufficient eco-communes are popping up all over the country and they have demands. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Empty luxury condos are being repurposed into houseless shelters and indoor gardens. Last living billionaire has relinquished their wealth, and politician behind in polls after speciesist comment. Oh my God, that's so good.
Okay, welcome back after the break. I hope you enjoyed some of those headlines as much as I did. Did you enjoy those, Mexie?
Those were amazing. I love them. I love the whole exercise of, dreaming the future that you want to see. And I feel like this is something that people should be doing more often to, I don't know, get their spirits up, but also to just flex that creativity muscle.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. Like dystopia, that word dystopia, the amazing book by Claire Mann that talks about, vegans living in a non-vegan world, and just this is a happy place. This is a happy space to be able to visualize what's coming. Like you say, affirmations. I should learn a little bit more about that. I'll try to listen.
Oh, for sure.
How can people reach you? How can people find out more about your work and support you?
Well, you can check out my channel on YouTube, which is Mexie, Mexie. And you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook, which is MexieYT, so at MexieYT. Also, you can check out my co-hosted podcast with Maureen, a privileged vegan. The podcast is called The Vegan Vanguard, and it's at veganvanguardpodcast.com. And we also have a Facebook, which is at Vegan Vanguard. And we have a Twitter, which is at vegan_vanguard. So yeah, come check us out, come chat to us. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good range of options. Do you still have a Patreon? Are you still accepting Patreon subscribers?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you can find so patreon.com/Mexie. I think it's just Mexie. And then patreon.com/Vegan Vanguard as well.
Awesome.
If you want to support the show.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. What does the future hold for you? What's next for Mexie?
Mexie's not sure. So I still have a year left. I'm doing a postdoc right now. So I still have a year left on that. And I'm not really sure what comes after, to be honest. I want to focus more on activism. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to have kind of a better work-life balance in the future. And maybe continue teaching, continue with content creation, and then get more focused on maybe more local activism. So we'll see. It really depends on, how I can make money in the future and, whether or not that impacts my health. Because I do still struggle with issues around my chronic illness. We're thinking of moving out of Toronto a little bit so that I can kind of maybe, lower my housing costs, which would maybe probably free up more time because I wouldn't have to take on so many jobs in order to support myself. So we'll see. But I'm definitely going to still be committed to content creation and to activism and things like that. So yeah, we'll see what the future holds.
Thank you so much for being with us, Mexie. It's been an absolute pleasure. Whatever you choose to do for the future, I hope you'll keep going with all the wonderful things that you've been doing. And you didn't mention being head of the matriarchy there, if matriarchies even have a head, but I certainly hope that the future involves that. I'm happy to bow down to you as Supreme Leader anytime. And thanks for making the time for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really love what you're doing. I obviously follow all of your activism and think you're doing just amazing stuff in London, Ontario. And just, yeah, thank you for doing all the work that you do. And thank you for all your support. And yeah, just means a lot. And yeah, just loved being on the show. So.
Well, we loved having you on the show. Thanks very much. And we'll be back next week with another Liberation Hour radio show on Facebook, YouTube, 102.7 FM, and Rogers Channel 946. Thanks, Mexie.
Thanks.
Welcome to another show of Liberation Hour Radio on Facebook, YouTube, on 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, and on Rogers Channel 946.